I'll go ahead and read the first question to Glenn so you can start thinking about it. Glenn, Sherry wants to know what are some of the typical manure management strategies at the Clayton Livestock Center? You might have to unmute.
We pretty much rely on rainfall we have a retention pond that's large enough to hold probably a 500-year event. And then it's a nice slope. So we clean the pens out as needed. And then when we clean the pens out, we will apply the manure across the road on the center pivot.
Okay, excellent, thanks. I'm gonna end our polling now and we'll see who we have with us. So it looks like more than half of the folks here on the call today are researchers. We have some crop producers, some extension professionals, some ranchers with us, and then program managers, ag advisors as well. So great. I will stop sharing these results and get back to some of the questions. And then I will be asking some questions of everyone on the call in just a minute. So Carolina is asking, do you think the wheat pasture for receiving cattle is a health strategy for our conditions? And how about numbers of head per area for receiving period?
Yeah, so when we look at the wheat pasture, we have received cattle on the wheat pasture. Last 2 years ago, I had a graduate student and we received the cattle right there on the pasture. And usually, it depends on the health status of the cattle coming in. If they're low risk cattle, it's easy to receive them on the pasture. High risk cattle, we usually receive them here in the feedlot. And we usually stock somewhere around 500 pounds of live weight per acre. So about 1 calf per acre is our traditional stocking density.
Excellent, thanks Glenn. Brent is asking about the seeding rate for the TAM 204 wheat.
120 pounds per acre.
Okay, excellent. And I have to scroll through to get to the next questions. Brent has another question. Do the crossbreeds and the pure Creole calves have longer legs proportionally than English breeds?
It's a good question. They're pretty framey. They're a lot framier cattle than what I thought. So yeah, it does look like they have longer legs than the traditional. Could be that just have shorter bodies too, or less depth in their body, makes them look longer.
Excellent. And then let's see, I don't want to miss anybody. Looks like Hunter is asking if you're using cottonseed or DDG as feed additives with the corn-based diet. And if so, are there noticeable differences?
We don't use cottonseed and DDG, that's the distiller's dried grains. We do get DDG in from, to use on our diets. Depending on last year when COVID hit, there was actually a shortage of distiller's dried grains because some of the plants closed down. But we'll use just some byproducts of the corn milling industry in our diets, and it does make them very palatable, and we should have fewer problems with acidosis when we use some of those co-products.
Awesome, thanks. And then Tony, calling in from Scotland, I believe, are any thoughts on individual feed intake equipment? I presume most is individual growth data, but group intakes.
We have some kaolin gates. We are going to put them in the receiving pens. Would like to get some growth safe units, which actually measure individual feeding behavior. And that's in the future for us. But yeah, it's primarily we do get the group intakes on most of our studies. We have some individual pens. When we need to, we can get individual data on those pens. Again, we'll be able to do that with the kaolin gates. We just have to get them set up.
Great. And Sherry's asking a question that relates a bit to the Sustainable Southwest Beef Project, and that's sort of knowing where the corn feed comes from. So we're curious about where most of yours comes from.
Local markets, because we grow quite a bit of corn around here. The Texas Panhandle, we have quite a bit of corn production fairly close to the research center. So we source our corn locally.
Awesome, thanks, Glenn. And then another question from Kim. Wonderful presentation, thank you. Will you take these crossbred calves through to the packer and compare carcass traits, including meat quality and traditional calves?
Yes, so that's part of our objective, is to look at the performance of these calves all the way through finishing, and then we will get them harvested at Tyson in Amarillo. We will be getting some loin samples, and they are going to, so they'll get the carcass traits, and then we're also going to get the taste panel at Texas A&M University.
All right, great. So now I have a question for everyone. We're going to use something called the chat waterfall. And the original question was, what is your biggest information need on the ranch? I'm going to change it a little bit because we have some ranchers, but a lot of other people here. So what is your biggest information need related to this research? I'm going to let you think about it and type your answer in, but don't hit enter yet. I'm going to give you a minute to just think about sort of your biggest information need related to the Clayton Livestock Research Center, what you've heard about today. Let everybody go ahead and type that in here. Give you about 10 more seconds. All right, now let's go ahead and hit enter and see what responses we get. Okay, great. So Jean, and we end up with a lot of responses. So I'm going to wait a minute before I start reading these. Okay, so Jean's wondering how much of the finishing feedstuffs come from the Oglalala region?
I would say a majority, particularly our corn. Some of the byproducts will come out of different parts of the country. They will get them from the Midwest, some of the co-products, but the majority of the corn would come from the Oglalala aquifer, and then also our wheat pasture. Across the road is, I think, on the Oglalala. I think Kate will update us later in her presentation.
Right. Excellent. And I think Sherry kind of has the same idea or question in flows of resources. So where resources are, how resources are flowing. And then Tony put something in here that I'm hoping you understand as in your capacity, FCE. Nope. Okay. Tony, if you want to unmute and share that, what you're asking, that would be great. And while we're waiting for that.
Yeah, so the feed conversion, we just put these Creoles on right now, but overall our feed conversion here is pretty typical of the feeding industry. Heifers will come out usually 7.25 feed to gain, steers somewhere around 6.25 to 6.5.
Excellent. And then Andreas has mentioned weight gain and health of crossbred and straightbred calves as something.
Yeah, that we will be measuring that, but this is the first, we just received those calves about a month ago. Okay. So we're just now putting them on. So, and the health of them has been pretty good. They're pretty, I would say they were pretty low risk calves coming in. They're coming directly off the ranches. So they didn't go through auction markets and get exposed to different pathogens. So the health's been pretty good on these animals.
Excellent, good to hear. And then the marketability is a big question that Danelle put in.
Yeah, if you look at these cattle, I can't, if I was looking at them without knowing, particularly the red Angus and then the ones crossed with Angus, I wouldn't be able to tell you they were crossed with Creole. The Brangus calves look like Brangus calves, so you know they have a little bit of ear in them, which sometimes that will affect the marketability of cattle. So if they have much Brahman influence, sometimes that will affect the marketability of those calves. But at finishing, right now, I don't think we'll be able to tell any difference between the crosses and the just the stray bred cattle. So we'll see how they do on the finishing as far as their quality grades, whether we get any difference in percent choice.
Yeah, and then that was another question related to finishing. So is there a difference in finishing between the Criollo and other breeds that you're aware of? And it sounds like that's part of the research.
Yes, that's part of the research.
Excellent. So we'll know soon, hopefully. And there are a few questions here that relate to a critical limiting resource in our area, which is water. So wanting some of the results framed in a sustainability context and wanting to know more about groundwater. Yep. So we'll hear a bit more about that from Kate later, but that's certainly a big component. And let's see, knowing more about grazing management and how to produce grass-fed beef. Excellent. So I have one more question for you, and curious about your opinion. Some of this relates to some of what people put in. We'll do the same thing. Here's your question. What's the biggest challenge to adoption of Murray Criollo cattle, in your opinion? So go ahead and put your answer in the chat box, and I think it does relate to some of your questions. We'll give you a few more seconds, and I'm curious to see your thoughts on this. All right, everybody, go ahead and hit enter. Right, okay, horns and small carcass size, marketability related to those, the aesthetic in relation to Corriente, perception that they aren't good compared to modern, right? So there's sort of a cultural perception that may be a big factor here. Glenn, any other thoughts on that?
We horn tip when we got the calves in, and most of them when they came in had small enough horns that we were able to go ahead and dehorn them. And then, so there shouldn't be any horns on that finishing. And that's one of the things that we have to be aware of in the feedlot industry, because of Tyson won't take cattle that have horns over a certain length. So that is a big issue with the cattle, but we horn tip them. If they're larger horns, if they're really small, kind of like nubs there, we'll just go ahead and just dehorn them, and they won't have any horn problem. But if you do it early enough, if they could do it at branding, the calves wouldn't even miss a beat on performance. The sooner you can do it, the better.
Excellent, thanks. And one last thing came in, and it's about consumer acceptability around tenderness and profitability for producers, feeders and packers.
Yes, very important. So that's really the objective of the finishing part of the breed comparison, is the overall product. So we're very aware that these are major issues, and that's a major objective of the breed comparison.
Right. And then another piece of that, Brenda Simpson just put in carcass grade.
Yep. So one of the things with the carcasses now, we're getting a majority of our carcasses as a grading choice or better, just in the overall industry. And that has a lot to do with the genetics on the Angus and the Red Angus. So I don't see any problems with the carcasses grading choice or better with the Red Angus and then the Angus calves. Brahman calves or the Brangus calves that we have may have a lower percentage choice, but I think they should be pretty acceptable too.
Excellent, thanks. And this is certainly all part of the research. The small body weight and performance is another question.
Yep. They will probably have smaller finishing body weight, and then performance, I think they'll perform all right. Just personally looking at him, if you look at those Angus calves coming out of Southern California. They're pretty framey, so they have a lot of room to put on some muscle, and then they should do all right on the performance of the animals.
Excellent. And we are at, we have about time for this one last question. We have 3 turns of cattle in the project, if memory serves. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. We will be repeating this project 3 years in a row. And so we did bring the Creole cows up here, and we will be calving those cows up here. And depending on the amount of rain that they get down in Las Cruces, they may be here until we wean them next fall. But we will do 3 turns of cattle. And then we have 3 cooperators. We have 1 Southern California, 1 in Utah, and then we're using the cattle from Las Cruces off of the universities or the college ranch. It's formerly called College Ranch.
Excellent. And there are more opportunities when we have the breakout room to ask more in-depth questions and talk with Glenn one-on-one about the livestock research and livestock there at Clayton. So you'll be able to do that again. We're at the end of our time